Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents A Companion to the Gangster Film by George S. Larke-Walsh, narrated by David Colacci and Susan Ericksen. Publisher's note: in this audio edition, you may hear references to visual elements present in the print and e-book formats of the book. Introduction. George S. Larke-Walsh. Gangster films have consistently been one of America's most popular genres. In 1954, Robert Warshaw calls their protagonists the logical development of the myth of the Westerner, and suggests they appeal to that side of us which refuses to believe in the normal possibilities of happiness and achievement. Earlier, in 1946, Warshaw had stated a gangster's tragic flaw as their refusal to accept limitations, thus arguing the inevitability of their downfall in every film. As such, gangsters are symbols of freedom and self-expression, but with a concurrent inability to control their impulses. Warshaw's descriptions provide easily understood and pragmatic reasons for the gangster's appeal, and consequently these two analyses have dominated responses and writings about the gangster film ever since their mid-century publication. However, gangster films have always been about so much more than individual excesses of crime and violence, or the protagonist's inevitable demise. As the study of cinema has developed and recognized the diversity of political and cultural ideologies at play in popular film, gangster narratives have been accepted as more complex than originally thought. Cinematic gangsters are often immigrants, or the dispossessed. They exist outside established political systems. Their actions often begin with bids for acceptance or simple survival, while their cultural identities are often distinct and shown as valuable. It is true that these values are corroded by the ensuing crime and violence, but it is the romance, or nostalgia for what the gangster initially stands for and then loses, that underpins the appeal of the gangster in modern culture. In many ways, the gangster film is the most ideologically conservative of the classical Hollywood genres, because it shows success to be a tenuous position, thus encouraging audiences to feel happier in their anonymity. However, it also applauds the desire for success in the first place, and often finds champions in the dispossessed. Gangsters are extreme examples of a universal impulse to fight against the limitations of one's social position, to beat the system at its own game by fair means or foul. Therefore, like all good genres, the gangster film is easily understood and digestible on a surface level, while also being complex and contradictory underneath. Gangster films are unique in comparison to other crime films because they are not narratives about petty criminals, mentally disturbed serial killers, or individuals on a crime spree. They are narratives about organization, about loyalties and betrayals, and about success or failure. Achievement is often measured simply through an individual's ability to survive their environment. Cinematic gangsters don't have lives outside their profession. They don't have the ability to walk away from their criminal identities. In these ways, the gangster genre is more than just a type of crime film. Gangster films are also not unique to American culture. They appear in every film industry across the world. The Japanese Yakuza and the Chinese Triad organizations have dominated the Asian crime film. Many draw upon the myths of the samurai or other wandering mercenary warriors in their imagery, thus promoting the ideals of loyalty and self-sacrifice within the genre. Russian and other Eastern European gangster films have emerged in earnest since the fall of the Soviet Empire, connecting organized crime with the rising influence of capitalist ideals and desires. The British gangster film tradition is derived from the mythology surrounding working-class gangland bosses, and therefore class and domestic politics influence every aspect. British cinema is also often noted for its attention to realism, and this is reflected in most other Central European industries as well. Italy is the original home of the myths of the mafia as a term to denote an organized criminal group. Therefore, it is one of the most interesting European players in the continued filmic presentation of those myths. There are many books that champion the appeal of the genre and its structure in various moments in cinema history. There are a variety of texts that applaud the majesty of the Godfather trilogy. This companion to the gangster film is one of the few to explore the popularity of gangster films across three major continents, the Americas, Europe, and Asia. It acknowledges the gangster genre as a global phenomenon and explores some of the reasons the genre remains so appealing to 21st century audiences across so many countries. Although the book is structured geographically, there are some common themes that occur across all three sections, such as production histories and reception, gender, race, and sexuality, mafia mythologies, and politics. Furthermore, all the chapters are aware of the transnational influence of genre, and so many discuss films from more than one continent. This aspect of the book is designed to remind listeners that no national cinema develops in isolation, and that cinema is a truly global popular art form. The gangster film has developed across many different countries throughout cinema history. As Ron Wilson notes, the gangster film, unlike other film genres, such as the Western, the action-adventure film, the science fiction film, and others, is the only genre whose nomenclature is centered on an individual rather than a concept. This means that, as a global genre, the gangster film literally has many faces. It has a variety of narrative structure, character types, and settings. From assassins to politicians, street guys to made men, outlaws to company men and women, a vast array of individuals exist in the cinematic gangster universe. This level of variety is, on the one hand, an indication of the richness and significance of the genre, especially in terms of identity and politics. However, this variety also indicates the elasticity of the genre's structural and thematic boundaries. Sometimes it feels as though certain films are accepted as part of the gangster genre primarily because they are marketed or reviewed as such. Their connection to the genre stems from a certain mood or thematic allusion to gangsters rather than an attention to a specific setting, single character type, or narrative structure. The genre has a lot of structural freedoms, but it is the gangster as an individual that is central to the genre and its significance. Such is the variability of a cinematic genre that has existed for 100 years and developed across the globe. The chapters in this collection do not devote all their time to assessing the boundaries of the genre, or even if boundaries should exist. Instead, they focus on the significance of various character types. From Fran Mason's exploration of the gangster assassin to Anna Granell's focus on the post-war spiv, Imru Bakari's rude boys and dons, or Dominique Liao's loyal middlemen, these gangsters are all career criminals navigating their own particular times and places. This flexible approach to genre is necessary simply because it acknowledges the fact that genre identification is an arbitrary and often contradictory process. As argued in Garrity and Jankovic, a text may be defined in one way within the process of production, in which a particular cultural industry has its own generic understanding of texts, and yet be marketed or exhibited in relation to a different genre. The ever-changing discourses that surround the labeling of films within particular genres are fascinating but ultimately reductive if it is the sole focus for arguing the merit of a particular film. The creation of value-based canons is a natural tendency in discussions of film, and I have argued for the cultural value of The Godfather as a significant factor in defining the gangster genre since the 1970s. My contention is that key films, such as The Godfather, act as common reference points in both formal and informal discussions of the gangster genre. However, this is not meant to argue that The Godfather dictates the boundaries of the genre. I merely believe the film is a key text because of the significant impact it has had on so many areas of pop culture worldwide. The Godfather, if you will, is cinematic shorthand for the Mafia. Any allusion to the film has an instant connection to popular understanding of organized crime. It is an offer we can't refuse. Indeed, there is no need for you to have watched the film to know this imagery or recognize its cultural value. Therefore, this collection does often identify key texts or distinctive periods of gangster film production and highlight their significance, not only at the time of production, but also across time periods and national cinemas. One of the hopes of this collection is that it may call attention to the interconnected nature of global cinema history. No national cinema exists in isolation, and therefore films speak to each other across time and space, creating a sense of shared experiences. Some films speak louder than others, and patterns of influence can be identified, but these all add to the fascinating complexity of gangster identities. They do not isolate or create specific genre boundaries. Early cinema. The earliest cinema is discussed in the first section of the book, focused on mainland North America, South America, and the Caribbean. Both Amy Borden and Ron Wilson discuss the periods prior to the classical gangster cycle of the 1930s. Borden focuses on the Nickelodeon and transitional era depictions of the criminal underworld, whereas Wilson looks at the development of sound in the late 1920s. Both chapters seek to address the social concerns that surrounded early cinema production and the hegemonic foundations of genre iconography prior to the commonly cited definitive films, The Public Enemy, 1931, Little Caesar, 1931, and Scarface, 1932. Assimilation narratives were a staple of film production in the early years of cinema. The film industry used its easy access to immigrant communities to provide education on American values and citizenship. It was not unusual for films to clearly define their perceived differences between ignorant, old country ways and the progressive, more refined American way to behave and prosper. The classic example, Making an American Citizen, 1912, directed by Alice Guy, made it clear that some of the brutish behavior that may have been acceptable in some parts of Europe was not welcome in the United States. Although not all films were this heavy-handed in their propaganda, it was evident that films created a clear demarcation between the American hero-heroine of the film and the immigrant villains, or fools. Exaggerated gestures, emotional outbursts of poor English on the intertitles, and brutish behavior encouraged audiences to believe in assimilation as the best way to prosper. Furthermore, popular crime films showed again and again that assimilation might save you from the ignorant beliefs and violence that held sway in the old country. The popularity of the Black Hand cycle of films produced from 1908 until the mid-1920s did just that by conflating the behavior of the Sicilian Mafia and the Neapolitan Camorra under the general term Black Hand, to highlight the perils of importing ignorant and/or criminal values into America. Borden's chapter explores this cycle of films and then focuses on Mary Pickford's film, Poor Little Peppina, 1916, as a slumming masquerade that emphasizes her star persona as America's sweetheart. The demarcation between Pickford, the epitome of American innocent beauty, and the brutality of the Black Hand in both Italy and America emphasizes the need for immigrants to cast off their connections to the old world. This era of early cinema helped to introduce the very basic visuals of organized crime as an imported problem under the banners of kidnap, extortion, and revenge. These narratives are valuable because although they lack the sympathies toward gangster behavior that developed by the late 1920s, they emphasize the power of organized crime to control lives and assert its influence across different cultures. The development of sound obviously added more nuance to the development of the gangster character on screen. Wilson's chapter on the earliest sound films describes the establishment of a form of anti-language that sets the gangster apart from ordinary society. This anti-language highlights the gangster's role as a rebel against authority and the establishment, a role treated with more sympathy now that America found itself in the middle of the unpopular and authoritarian era of Prohibition. Just like the Black Hand films, these later films retain a connection to real-life crime, often showing how their narratives are ripped straight from the newspaper headlines. However, this time the gangsters are more likely to be applauded for their antics. One of the important developments to note here is the submersion of base ethnic gestures and vocabulary into a more urbane, middle-class demeanor. The language of this gangster, emphasized for the first time on screen, is no longer the bad English of the European immigrant, but an American language born in its own urban streets. The specific immigrant nature of organized crime has now been dissolved into a more American image of rebellion and individualism. Reviews of these early films show that while the film's hero often mends his ways by film end, the film's main attractions occur in the more rebellious sequences, such as bar shootouts or prison fights. Thus, from a mix of immigrant assimilation and rebel narratives, the American gangster is born. Although Borden and Wilson's chapters are the only ones to focus entirely on early cinema, all of the chapters contextualize their studies within both cinema history and wider socio-cultural interests. Elaine Chaplin provides a history of the Yakuza film from its inception in silent cinema to its decline in the 1990s economic downturn in order to contextualize her study of masculinities. Similarly, Hülya Önal analyzes how the myths of Turkish outlaws merged with modernization stories to create the political image of gangsters and the mafia seen in today's Turkish cinema. How and when the image of the gangster emerges within a particular culture is crucial to understanding its wider influence, and so the links between cinema and history are at the core of this collection. The chapters have been structured geographically to enable one to navigate the vast array of topics in logical groupings. However, in order to promote the interconnected nature of global cinema history, this introduction will continue its overview by grouping the chapters under specific themes rather than simply the order they appear in the book. In doing so, the hope is to draw attention to patterns of film production, themes, and aesthetics. One can easily navigate the book geographically, but through this introduction they can also follow the threads of global connections and influences. George S. Larke-Walsh. Cinema and History. Every fiction film reflects the place and time of its production, but the gangster film has a special relationship to the here and now. Jonathan Munby, in his study of the gangster from early American cinema through the Cold War, states, "Unlike other central national myths, such as the cowboy and the Western outlaw, the gangster never allows an escape from the problems of the here and now. He is not so much about the past or an alternative landscape as he is about the inescapable truths of the urban present." The genre may not be necessarily concerned with recounting historical fact, but it does provide a commentary on the beliefs and anxieties of a nation at particular times. Thus, it is always necessary to recognize the period in which a film is produced in order to gain a better understanding of its structure and themes. John Petty's chapter on the production code era gangster provides a detailed exploration of the genre's development from the 1930s to the 1960s, and how its adaptations mirror the social concerns of the times. While the gangster film per se disappeared in response to the new strict censorship rules, the gangster character remained. He appeared in comedies, cop thrillers, war films, noir thrillers, biopics, and heist films. Such adaptability exists, of course, because in the end the genre is about the individual more than about a specific set of events or locations. For instance, Petty's analysis argues for Casablanca, 1945, to be recognized as successfully utilizing the gangster genre format, and the film's hero, Rick, Humphrey Bogart, as a development of the gangster character. He suggests the genre evolved to become more American culture's way of examining those in society, such as dissidents or rebels who refused to toe the line. In certain circumstances, not towing the line might be viewed as an admirable act for wartime characters such as Rick. Thus, over these middle decades, the American gangster's ability to exist across so many genres resulted in an increasing complexity of character. At heart, the gangster is a representative of the archetypal American individual, self-assured, aspirational, and brave, but also capable of great cruelty and self-destruction. By the end of the production code era, the gangster was fully embedded in American culture, instantly recognizable, but also full of exciting contradictions. The connections between European and American cinema and the impacts of comedy on the development of the genre are evidenced in John Petty's discussion, and Ryan Calabretta-Sager echoes these findings in his chapter on Italian and Italian-American cinema of the 1950s and 1960s. He examines the comedy heist films and the meta-documentary realist films of the late 1950s and early 1960s in both Italy and America as crucial examples of the development of the genre and the continued formation of a gangster mythology. He argues that the everyday struggles of a post-war existence, especially in Italy, create audience sympathies for the gangster character, who, albeit by criminal means, is only trying to survive. In a film such as Big Deal on Madonna Street, 1958, the comedic tone means that the heist itself and most of the events leading up to it are doomed to failure, but the process allows for a close examination of the structure of the gang as well as their individual choices in the face of adversity. Morality is noted as a more crucial element for gaining audience sympathy in American cinema, while in Italian it is far less important. Thus, while American cinema's Ocean's 11, 1960, is practically the same narrative as Big Deal on Madonna Street, the characterizations are significantly different, in that the American narrative has a clearer set of motivating factors. In both films, though, the planning and execution of elaborate heists are shown as enjoyable capers, and while both gangs fail to keep their ill-gotten gains, neither gang is officially brought to justice. Similarly, Calabretta-Sager argues that meta-documentary style of gangster films in the same period also helped to develop the mythology of the gangster for cinema audiences. He focuses on Salvatore Giuliano, 1962, and Al Capone, 1959, and their attention to the realities of gangster activity. These films, he argues, show the brutal reality of life in the mafia, and thus, like the comedies, encourage audiences to reconsider the gangster's role in society. Finally, two transnational films that focus on the movement of gangster activity between Italy and America, Mafioso, 1962, a comedy, and Black Hand, 1950, a realist film, focus on the transnational reach of gangster activity and the inability of individuals to escape. Calabretta-Sager's chapter suggests this period of filmmaking as highly influential for the gangster in both Italy and America. The diversity of these films, as also shown in Petty's discussion, reveals the significance of gangster characters within mid-century cinema. Diversity is at the center of Philip Swanson's analysis of the gangster film in Latin America, for he notes how the many different cultural identities involved are often merged into an othering, pan-Latinization by Hollywood films that quite obviously denies the specificity of each country's character. His chapter unpacks the stereotypes and charts the development of the gangster figure from early prototypes of the urban gangster in the forms of the compadritos or guapos of Buenos Aires, as celebrated by Jorge Luis Borges, through subsequent films of pre-revolutionary Cuba to the late 20th century films that emerged following the decline of military dictatorships. He notes how the gangster genre proper emerged in the wake of the crisis of neoliberalism, and when migration became a key factor in the portrayal of gang culture, especially in the Hispanic United States. Focusing on a vast array of films, Swanson's chapter provides crucial insights into the diversity of Hispanic American films. While Latin American identity is most often portrayed as the exotic other in Hollywood films, the Latin gangster remains an ambiguous character in both arenas. Swanson notes that throughout cinema history, the Latin gangster remains a problematic figure, unbiddable yet dogged by fate, dangerous but glamorous, alluring yet irredeemably other. Imru Bakari's discussion of the history of the Jamaican gangster film highlights a very similar relationship with American culture. In similar ways to Latin America, the Caribbean is both part of and separated from America. The relationship is complex, but crucial to an understanding of how its own identity has developed. While the gangster film is relatively recent, emerging in Perry Hensel's The Harder They Come, 1973, and remains a sparse collection of films in contrast to other national cinemas, its films are rich in character. Their themes follow the aspirational model of the American gangster film, and often include in this a desire to escape the limitations of island life. The Jamaican gangster is a rebel that struggles to find his place, or perhaps confine his aspirations to the island's post-colonial political and social spaces. Bakari's chapter explores the role of the traditional outlaw character type, the post-colonial youth or rude boy character, and the influence of musical styles such as ska, rocksteady, and reggae in creating a distinctively Jamaican gangster identity. Local politics and inter-gang rivalry feature heavily in the late 1990s and post-millennium films. Jamaican gangsters, like all the gangsters in cinema history, are products of their environment. A desire to escape, to succeed on their own terms, is a prevailing theme. The history of both Latin American and Jamaican gangster films reveals problematic heroes that do much to reveal both areas' valuable but contentious relationships to the United States. Post-war narratives. Births, rebirths, or just significant cycles of gangster films occur again and again throughout cinema history. All of the chapters in this collection recognize an important era of filmmaking and its historical significance. It is evident that the gangster often reemerges after a period of significant political or social unrest. Post-war America and Europe is a particularly rich era for study. However, for Asian cinema, it is the 1980s and beyond that provides the richest examples of the gangster film. Dominique Liao's chapter on post-martial law Taiwanese films focuses on the 1990s and beyond as the gangster's most significant era. After centuries of colonization, Taiwan's newfound independence promised many freedoms, and with so many generations torn between their Chinese and/or Japanese cultural connections, independence left them with many unresolved feelings of loss or alienation. Taiwan alternative cinema in the 1990s and 2000s wished to explore some of the traumas involved in the redevelopment of a specifically Taiwanese identity and explored ideologically pertinent but difficult issues of cultural assimilation, poverty, crime, and individual aspirations using the gangster film. Two films by Ho Xiaoxian dominate this cinema landscape. A City of Sadness, 1989, introduces the topic, and Goodbye South, Goodbye, 1997, develops the themes further. Both of these films reflect life under the mid-century rule of the Chinese Kuomintang regime, known as the KMT. While
Sample complete. Ready to continue?